back with another episode of the Branders Magazine Talking with Branders podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Bacanza, and today in the studio, we have the one and only Martin Lindstrom. He is the number one branding and culture expert, and I can just list the accolades down the line. Time Magazine is one of the most 100 influential people, host of the Forbes M&M show, global advisor to huge brands that are interwoven into the fabric of everyday society, and a longtime Branders contributor and supporter. Martin, welcome to the studio. How are you today?
Oh, I'm excellent. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, so good to have you. So good to see you again. For those that don't know the brand of Martin Lindstrom, and I don't know how that's possible, but for those that don't know, can you enlighten everyone? 60-second elevator pitch.
Whoa, I'm getting nervous now. Well, listen, I help typically Fortune 100 brands, turning them around when there's an issue. So typically I get one of those distressed call from an owner or a CEO saying, hey, we have an issue. And what I really do is to connect them with the consumers. Quite often I forget about the consumers, rebuild the culture and transform the organization. And we've been so blessed to do that with, I think, around 15% of the Fortune 100 brands in the world. So we've had a lot of fun and a lot of challenges.
That's amazing. And Martin, your energy and just your compassion that I sense, even though you're in Monaco, I'm in Philadelphia, but like the energy that you bring is infectious, and I'm an energy guy. So, you know, I'm so fascinated by you. I've read books and I've watched you speak, and you do transformative work for companies that equate to billions of dollars, yet you seem so humble. How do you do that?
Do you know what? I'm always asked who is my mentor in life. And the more I think about it, I found who my mentor is. That is the person on the street. Over the last 20 years, I've lived in more than 3,000 consumer homes across more than 100 different countries. And when you see the good and the bad and the ugly, you see the realities of life. And that really keeps you grounded, because when I move into someone stranger's home in Venezuela or in Nigeria or in Iran, or for that sake in United States, in UK or in France, then I don't have a business card on me. I don't have all my fancy credentials with me in my bag. I'm just who I am. And I need to connect with people at their level to understand how they live. And do you know what? Time after time, the most happy people, the most intelligent people I meet are those people. It's not the billionaires. It's not those people with the fancy watches. So yes, I guess that by default have kept me humble.
Growing up, where does that come from? Like, you know, they say the first 7 years are the most transformative years. And I'm just curious on, like, what was your first 7 years like that made you the person you are today?
I was almost giving you a rude answer there to that particular question, but I'm just turning my answer around here now for a second.
Not rude, it's honest, it's honest.
You know what? I was super lucky when I was a kid. I loved Lego and built my own Lego land in the backyard of my mom and dad's garden. And that was serious stuff. You know, it took me about a year to build up this Lego land. And one day I opened the gates to this new theme park, and only two people showed up, my mom and my dad, which really was the lowest point of my career. So I went to a local print office and I persuaded them, God knows how, to put an ad in the paper. And guess what? 2 days later, we had 131 visitors showing up. There was just one problem. Visitor number 130 and visitor number 131 were the lawyers from Lego suing me. They said, what's our brand? I said, what is a brand? So basically what happened later on was that the owner of Lego heard about it. He took his little Fiat Punto, I think it was, basically went to my parents' house. I'm born in Denmark. Lego is from Denmark.
Yeah.
And he basically offered me to get a job at Lego, an intern job. So I was probably, and still am today, the youngest kid ever employed at Lego at the age of 12. So that was really my foundation. I did crazy stuff and have never stopped doing that.
No. And for those that are listening, do crazy stuff. That's life right there. We have one shot to do crazy stuff.
Yeah,
Like, let's not miss it.
no.
You talk about Lego and there's this meme that I've seen where you have a bunch of random Legos out there and it's called big data. And then the Legos are compartmentalized by color and it's called like strategy or something like that. And then the Legos build a house and it's called like, the creative execution or something. It's something along those lines. You are a big proponent of like small data and like really embracing this idea of small data. What's the difference between small data and big data?
Well, big data is all about correlations. It's about connecting the dots. But you always need an hypothesis first, what we call the causation. And that's small data. I define small data as seemingly insignificant observations you make in people's life, which point towards one or several unmet opportunities. But if I should look at it from a different perspective, the true difference between big and small data and the outcome of that is this. Big data could very easily conclude that the more umbrellas you sell, the more it rains. And that's probably true if you look at the data connections because you do not have the context. And that's the reason why I always say it takes two to tango. You need an equal part of small and of big data. It is once you have those two dimensions, you get a full picture. Yet today we have become so addicted to those numbers, believing that's the truth of everything. But I don't need to tell you more than the elections in the United States. I don't think there's been a time since the last three elections where anything was predicted accurately, right?
Right.
Based on big data. So I think in the end of the day, it's all about connecting with the human soul and understanding who we are and why we behave the way we do.
How should brands? I've in my work, Martin, and I've done a lot of like agencies bring me in as a strategist for hire, help with this pitch or help pull through this campaign. We have this data. How do we make sense of it? Because every agency, claims to make creative decisions based on data, and we'll get to that one in a bit. But how should brands be whose job, if their job is to protect the legacy of their organization, to protect the brand, right? If I look at like a brand manager, how should they be leveraging this idea of big data and small data and not get overwhelmed?
Well, it's a deep question because I think, first of all, one had to question that brand manager or that CMO in the organization because it is really a self-standing silo within the organization with little or limited contact to the other functions. And that is a problem because today you cannot isolate a brand into one department, then you have customer service in the second one, and you have the operational challenges in the third one. Because what will happen then is really the same as if you were going into united.com, buying a new ticket, and basically the first question will be, where do you want to go? Okay, we tick that in. What seat would you like to sit in? Yeah. What error bridge would you like us to connect to the plane? And by the way, the luggage carousel manager outsourced team, who should that be? We don't do that. You click on whatever and then you get your ticket. Those silo mentalities are increasingly disappearing because everything is just a click away. Yet within organizations, we have a tendency to split things up to handle it. But in my opinion, a brand manager, for that sake, a chief marketing officer, needs to be both responsible for the culture, for the brand, and for the customer journey. And for that sake, also be part of the innovations of products and services. Yet that's not the case. So, long story short, I think it's extremely important that a brand manager embed itself, he or herself, into the other functions. And with those folks, bring them into the homes of the consumers or to the offices of the customers and have them feel what's going on and then bring that back, place a holistic view on all of it and say, what does it mean for the bigger part of our brand?
It sounds pretty unicorn, esque, like having a CMO or a brand manager that is able to. able to see the forest through the trees because they're just so down in their weeds, and they have to make the Q4 numbers, Martin. If you don't make those Q4
Heard about
numbers,
them. Yeah.
you don't have a job in Q1. So like that's a balance. That's a hard balance. When you come into companies, how do you arm them with the right tools to be able to step away?
Well, I think it's really important to, first of all, turn the perspective rather than seeing the world from inside out to see the world from outside in. And that means you need to have a shared reference. If you're seeing the world from inside out, you are basically seeing the world from the point of view of your silo. So if you sit in your department, for example, in the customer service department, maybe you're measured on time, and maybe you are measured on quality in another department. In the third one, you're measured on waste. The issue is that those KPIs are not aligned. And when they're not aligned, you're all hunting different targets, and you're really not interested in working together. So one of the first things we always doing is to align the KPIs under the purpose of the organization and saying, in the end of the day, what is it really we want to achieve? And yeah, I get it. We want to earn money. Okay. But the reality is we probably have to go one step further. Do we want to change lives? Let me give you an example. If I take Volvo, okay, the car manufacturer, they own one word, by the way, one word, just like Google own one word, which is search. Volvo owns one word, which is safety. And what they've done is they've focused everything around it. In fact, they came out with a statement about 10 years ago saying by 2020, there should be no death or serious injuries if you drive in a Volvo car. Now, guess what? That's, first of all, very courageous. But the second point to this is it's actually true. They haven't had that since 2020, according to themselves. Now, what's really interesting is now they're developing everything around it. They were the first in the world to invent the 3-point seatbelt. It was invented in 1959, inspired by the Swedish Air Force. The first to invent the airbags in the side of the car. The first to invent, and I still hate them for that, to invent the seatbelt alarm, right? But the reality here is they were extremely focused in the R&D. And then later on, they came up with new innovations. For example, recently they came out with Project Eve. Project Eve is basically a project where they take all the data they've learned about safety, and in particular safety for women in cars, because most cars are not designed for the shape of a woman. It's designed for the shape of a man. So if you're pregnant or you're small or whatever it is, it does not fit to the seatbelt configuration. So they took those data, it's nearly 30 years of data, and gave them free of charge to all the competitors. Now that is a purpose. And then you could say, this is really the driving force, safety, and then the money will follow. Once you have locked that in within your organization, everyone will work towards that goal. And I think that's sometimes missing in this very corporate and very commercial world.
Sometimes I feel organizations have a purpose just to check a box, but they don't
You
live
won't feel
it.
it. It's true. I mean, I can't recall the number of people in departments and companies I've been entering where they've had a plaque on the wall with some fancy mission statement or purpose statement or vision statement. And the first 5 pages in the annual report is talking about it as well. And then everything collapses when they have a financial crisis in one quarter. They kind of forget about the environment and whatever. I mean, I think the good news here is that we're migrating away from a generation led by white middle-aged men, i.e. people like us, to a new generation where they actually care much more about the environment, they care much more about sustainability, about equality, about those factors. And I do know that a lot of you folks probably listening or watching this are saying, do you know what? Here we go again. But I'll tell you one thing. I was just in Denmark the other day, and I went to the cinema, and there was 4 out of 8 of the commercials running in the cinema which were about sustainability. 2 of them talked about how you became a better sustainable citizen, and 2 of them about how brands could help you to become more sustainable. That was basically 50% doing it. And that is clearly the trend we're seeing. I mean, out of Denmark, they invented the windmills back in the early 70s. In fact, my mom and dad had a windmill in the backyard of the garden when I was 6 years of old, 6 years of age. That
Wow.
was 1976. So, I mean, what we're seeing happening is that sustainability trend is really coming across, I think, the world. And if you are smart as a company, you wave it into your purpose because the
Yeah.
young generation really care a lot about it right now. And increasingly, they're willing to pay more for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, good for you if you don't have a purpose and it's just fake, but it's not going to last for a long time. And it takes some time to get your house in order, right?
You've said, in working with the Fortune, Fortune 100 and a big majority of the company that you've consulted with, do you often find that they have problems with their purpose? Is that like where sometimes a lot of their organizational issues, like that's where it starts?
They don't have problems with the purpose because I don't think they know what a purpose is. They want
Mm,
to tick the purpose box, just like they increasingly want to tick the quality box and the sustainability
yeah.
box. But I honestly don't think they care. And I only think they care either because they, from a legislation point of view, are forced to think that way, or if there's one person or two people within the organization which really burns for that matter, then I see this is dialed up. But in general, I have to say the only way I can make them care about this is if I coincidentally, through our ethnographic visits, so that's picking up the small data, are clearly learning that this whole generation, they just don't want to support that brand unless they think
Yeah.
that way. Also, I have to say the United States in general are very behind on that particular topic, and for good reasons. I mean, it's very simple. When you live in smaller countries, you can't have too much shit around you. I mean, then you
Yeah.
drown and die. But if you have a very large country, you can always park it somewhere in the
Push it
middle.
somewhere else. Right.
Oh, yeah, and then it's gone at least for 5 minutes, right?
Right.
So I do think that mentality is very linked with it. I mean, as you know, I also spend time in Australia, and that's very much the case. I know I learned a lot about recycling because that's been my childhood, always to recycle bottles and whatever. And I had to unlearn recycling when I moved to Australia because literally it didn't exist. So I do
Wow.
think that we still have a lot of leeway to get up to speed with when it comes to those purpose driven topics. I think it will take a couple of years more unless you really manage to put a pressure on the organization through consumer insight, where you clearly can see, hey, if you don't do that, you have a problem very soon, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating how the correlation between like the United States, we're just a juggernaut of size. Like we're just vastness there, and I think equally, we want to just sweep things under the rug and deal with it in a different day. And I think that's kind of what you're saying with organization. We'll just sweep this under the rug. We'll acknowledge it, but we're not going to really do anything about it. That's really interesting. Let's talk now about agencies. And I was listening to you on a podcast, and you said that agencies are prostitutes. And I've always kind of worked within agency walls, and why are they, why? And I think I know the answer, but for those that are listening, why are agencies prostitutes?
Is the truth coming out now? Is that what we're hearing?
Yeah, we got the truth serum.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know what? I worked in the agency business since I was 12, 13 years of age, because just after my Lego story, I actually started up my own advertising agency and sold that to BBDO when I was 18. So I've been working in the agency up until I was 30, I guess. And agencies are extraordinarily good, and they're a little bit like a peacock. And they're extraordinarily good at looking good for the purpose of winning a client. As soon as they win the client, somehow that A team disappears in a
Yeah.
magical way, and there's a B and C team appearing, unless the client is really aggressive. And the problem is that agencies rarely are going in saying, hey, you ask us to advertise or communicate about brand X and C and product X, Y, and Z, but it's crap. It doesn't work. We have to
Yeah.
fix it. They rarely go into the machine house and rebuild the products and the services. if they don't work. They rarely go back to the client and say, hey, you right now should probably integrate all your touch points in a stronger way within the organization so you all work together. No, and rather they are going to say, well, let's do an ad campaign or a direct campaign or a social campaign or whatever. So it becomes very much makeup on top of a very veneer thin surface. Had agencies as a concept been smarter, they would have gone the McKinsey, the Bain, the BCG type of way, where they strategically would have placed themselves closer to the decision-making folks within the organization, and then fix the strategy, execute the strategy, and then offer their communication piece. That is the reason why you see all those are mentioned, including Accenture, including all of them basically. They have advertising agencies now, which they've
Yeah.
acquired, and they're built into their own organization. But guess what? Those offerings are always secondary. They're never the primary offering on the consulting side. And that's the reason why you will see that the advertising agencies as a concept will die if it's not dead already. Also because sadly, and you know this as much as I do, if not more, the concept of creativity is just not respected in our world. Is not respected because we are so incredibly petrified of offending anyone. So we're watering down the message to an extreme degree where there's no edge. It doesn't
Yeah.
have any punch. And you're just afraid. So fear is driving the decision-making process along with committee work. And you could say that was the holy grail when it came to advertising agencies in the past, at least. Now they become more number crunching agencies, which are spitting out AI generated ads in the millions. Well, that's not really creativity. That's more a production house. So yes, there were prostitutes, and that probably were the undoings in the end of the day.
Yeah. Do you, I mean, so much of the advertising that's out there and the creativity, it's mediocre at best, you know, and there's really nothing truly groundbreaking. Everything is just a regurgitation of something from the past. Do you feel that because there's so much data out there that's numbing creativity? Like the more data we have, the less creative we're getting, even though agencies are saying we're basing our creativity on data because that's what CMOs want. Like there's like a weird fucking thing going on here.
I think that's partly to do with the issue. I think another issue is the concept of Wall Street, which is the quarter announcement earnings, where you every quarter need to prove the existence of the company. You can't turn around a brand image in 90 days.
Yeah.
You can't basically create a huge success in 90 days. Yeah, maybe you can have an indication of it if you're really good. But the reality is that Wall Street demands that increasingly, and that demand is going the whole way up to the CEO, which may actually be very much on board on the idea of taking quality time. But then you have the investors, which are punishing him or her when finally that person decides to do it. So when it becomes so short-sighted as it is, you also in the CMO role, on the marketing, branding, communication role, increasing will say, well, hey, then I need to do some quick wins, and quick wins linked with quick evidence, and then it's linked with quick data. And those data, rarely you can't prove that you fell in love in 3 months, but you probably can prove that you had 1,500 impressions suddenly of an ad or whatever it is. And then it becomes extremely tactical with no emotions attached to it, because emotions takes time to establish, right?
Yeah, that's such a valid point. As you mentioned earlier, the notion of like AI ads and AI and like AI, you got deep fakes and virtual influencers on the rise. How do you see the future of branding, you know, maintaining trust and authenticity in a world we're kind of seeing is not believing anymore?
I think, first of all, that you will see two major trends happening. Not to think, I know, I would say at least one of them is for sure. We are clearly seeing right now that brands are becoming more and more local in order to survive, even though they're truly global, they become more local. That's the way they reconnect with consumers. So if you take some of the major global brands, they are fighting against private labels, and they're
Mm.
basically saying the private labels can connect with consumers because they're much more local. So you will see the brands will have to become much more local. Global brands as a concept, in my opinion, are dying. Yeah, of course, you will have the Cokes of the world and the Apples of the world. Well, when you take a look at the statistics, you actually don't have a lot of global brands appearing to the same degree as you did just 20 or 30 years ago. The
Hmm.
second part, in terms of AI, I think the role of AI um, will become an amplifying tool to reconnect with the local communities and adopt a more targeted voice. So if I communicate as a brand to a certain segment, AI within the very short future will be able to adjust the messages to be highly relevant. I'll give you an example from one of our clients, which is a very large insurance company, where when an agent, which probably have 3,000 different customers, will have to email or communicate with one of their customers, it would become very generic PDF being sent out. But if you do have a pretty fair and decent set of information with permission about whatever that person is doing, well, then you can actually put that thing through a filter and talk about, hey, your flooding in the neighbor areas happened last year, and listen, I can see that you have not been covered by that. Or by the way, there is a hurricane arriving in South Carolina right now in that area. There's so much damages there, and this is what's going to happen right now with you if you're simulating it. Now, that would be one agent spitting out 3,000 individual customized messages like this. So I do think that we're seeing that extreme customization, like an extra extension of an arm
Yeah.
for a lot of service functions, which probably would become very, very powerful. Now, we're not 100% there yet, but it's just a matter of, I will almost say months, not even years anymore.
Yeah. But I think, it's like this idea of, relevancy, like relevant topic. You said a hurricane as an example, and like using AI to personalize. It's like taking this idea of personalization and brand personalization to the nth degree, leveraging AI in like in a mass function. The way that you are talking about it, Martin, it's very optimistic. Yet there's a lot of pessimism around AI. Does as optimistic as you are you also kind of like scared shitless?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, we are right now conducting the largest experiment in the world using what we call immersed reality. It's a $22 million experiment, and we're doing that with the sole purpose of simulating what the future will look like when it comes to augmented reality, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. And out of that, basically find out what is the role of brands going to be, what's the role of we as individuals on planet Earth going to be, what's the role of companies and corporations going to be. And I have to tell you already now, without disclosing any results, it's extraordinarily concerning what we're seeing being spit out of that machine at the moment. We are hitting one of the biggest challenges ever, I would say, at least for sure, in our living memory, but perhaps in on a long-term perspective, biggest ever, because we are undermining democracy for sure.
Hmm.
We're undermining anything which comes to truth and trusts for sure. And if you take those two things and turn them against you as a weapon, we are highly likely to have a force which is much bigger and much more succinct than us, which we certainly are fighting against, whether that is leading to a pollution in war or a pollution in information and data or a pollution in basically trust between people. So this is an extremely important topic and something we follow every hour across the world. When I'm talking positive about AI, well, I do that because it's here to stay for sure. And I think you are old enough to remember 1994, which was the year the World Wide Web was invented.
Yeah.
And I remember it very clearly because I surfed the entire World Wide Web every 159 pages it was. Clearly, that was the entire World Wide Web back then, the internet today. And I remember I said to myself, I have two choices now. Either I say, well, yeah, whatever, move on to something else. I say, I want to embrace it. And I did that. I wrote the first book in the world about how to build brands online. And I have the same center now, that if you don't embrace it, if you stand on the sideline with a banner and saying, get that out of my life, I don't think you can impact it. I think you need to be working from within this monster, so to speak, and then manipulate where it's going. And that, by doing that, you'll have a chance of directing it towards something which is not going to be as disastrous as what I just painted.
I mean, so many valuable nuggets there. Where do you, when you start to add the layer of like something like blockchain on top of this, we talk about a disruption, and I'm not just talking about currency or crypto. I'm just talking about the ideology of blockchain. It makes the world so complicated, and brands, how do brands like navigate like their long-term strategy when the rate of change is daily? Like it just seems almost like a never-ending uphill battle.
Well, that was two questions in one. So let me see if we can answer both of them. On the blockchain topic, I think it's very important for the viewers and the listeners to remember the blockchain, as you say rightly so, is not necessarily a currency. It's also an underlying infrastructure which actually can track your pieces, whatever they are, indefinitely, and whatever it's being said about it is true. I.e., if you buy an apartment, there will be a blockchain or a twin apartment established virtually in virtual reality, which is tracking all the mistakes that apartment had. So when you buy that apartment, you're not suddenly being surprised after 2 years when everything collapses, because you already knew that from a blockchain stored database. You will see this will happen when it comes to counterfeit. All the new Louis Vuitton bags being released will have what's called a lava code on them, and basically it means that you can track the authenticity of this, and you just can't cheat around it. It's impossible. So I think that in many ways is actually only a benefit for brands, because there's so much counterfeit around. Now back to your second question in terms of how do you keep on top of it. Do you know what? It's super, super difficult for companies. And it's difficult for companies because they have their own legacy systems. They have their own set structures and ways of doing things. And that's the reason why I tend to, when we work with organizations, to disrupt them artificially. I did this many years ago with Lego, as an example. I mean, this is almost 20 years ago. I did a workshop at the headquarters of Lego, and I said to them, let's simulate the plastic is not around anymore, just for fun, and then say what would happen with Lego. And I remember many of the executives said to me that was the most stupid exercise they've ever done. Well, guess what? By 2030, Lego will be a 100% sustainable plastic product, where actually is a very different format of plastic which will disappear on planet Earth once you have used it and it's been in the sun for a certain number of hours and days. We disrupted the company way before they actually were witnessing the issue. And I think you need to do that, whether that is in terms of a cyber attack. I mean, an example is another client of ours, which is Maersk, the largest shipping company in the world. I remember we actually did a simulation of a cyber attack way before on what are the consequences if you are attacked. Well, guess what happened? Maersk actually was attacked, and literally 25% of all trade literally disappeared on planet Earth for 6 weeks. It was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, cyber attack in the world. Now, when you are prepared for those extreme attacks or disruptions, you build that into your strategy. And I do think that a lot of companies are not simulating that. They're not simulating disruption because they feel so disrupted already. But I think that is the goal and the mission of people sitting in the strategy functions, to do exactly that, because the world has never gone this fast and will never be this slow again.
It's almost naive for brands to operate without simulation, without simulating the moments, those moments where, something can disrupt them, right? Like they're just operating, and it's kind of philosophical in a way, right? I'm a student of Stoic philosophy, and part of the Stoic philosophy talks about like kind of premeditating on, whether it's death or unfortunate circumstances. So when unfortunate circumstances happen, you are prepared. So the idea is, by focusing on the negative, on these shit moments, you're actually preparing yourself for when they do come. I think brands need to be doing more of that, and they're operating with a naiveness.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think they're working with a naiveness because the churn of staff is so high. I mean, an average employee staying in a job for 4 years, if you look in the marketing role, is around 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So why would you bother? Because the crisis was just there, and now you have 2.5 years of freedom before something else. So you're not really going to earn money from that. And so that comes back to that short-term focus, which is just not healthy, because it's just you're forgetting to put things into perspective, and it's that perspective which are adding a point of differentiation for your brand or company, right?
Totally. Amazing, Martin. This conversation has been so profound. Last question here. What is next for the Martin Lindstrom personal brand? I mean, you world-renowned author. I mean, you have the bucket list of a resume. What lies ahead?
Well, first of all, it's very kind you're saying all these words. I really do not feel I've achieved anything in my life. So we are
very Socrates of you, right? Socrates said, the only thing I know is that I don't know anything. So exactly. I like that.
And it's getting worse and worse by the minute. Do you know what? I tend to say that I live in a dream, and I hope I'll never wake up. Or said in another way, I never gone to work, and the day I start working, I'll quit working. And that's really where I am as a person. I'm, of course, going to write another book, and this time it will be about immersed reality. And it's going to be, I think, a very, very insightful piece of work because it's based on such a huge global experiment. But in general, what we are so lucky doing is that we get these huge challenges, whether we had to rebrand a country or rebrand a religion or rebrand a royal family or rebrand a Fortune 100 brand. So we are so blessed with having these extraordinary challenges. And I have to say, they're so crazy, they're so different, they're so challenging. It is like I get a new job every time, and literally I do. So that's what is in it for Martin Lindstrom, I guess.
Amazing. Martin, where can our listeners find you? Are you on LinkedIn? What's your website URL? Tell us.
Well, it's super simple. The URL is martinlindstrom.com. And if you want to find me on LinkedIn, type in my name or type in Lindstrom Company. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram and on X.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Martin. For more on the Branders Magazine, Talking with the Branders podcast, go to brandersmagazine.com. And for more on me, StephenPicanza.com. And until next time, peace out.